Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, October 3rd, 2017 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair, can you reach back behind that screen and grab that glasses case on the other side of it?
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Let me remind commissioners, please make sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the mic for the record. And we'll call roll. Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie, Commissioner Crane, Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Sarsfield.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do have a quorum. No personal appearances this evening. One item under our consent agenda, which is acceptance of minutes from our September 19th, 2017 meeting. And unless any of the commissioners have concerns about the minutes, I would entertain either a motion to approve the consent agenda or accept minutes of the September 19th meeting.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Turnbow.
Second.
And second by Commissioner Sarsfield. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. None opposed, no abstentions. And nothing this evening under old business, which takes us right along to new business. The first case this evening, case 17028, Cunningham at Creekmore Pool Site Plan. And Mr. Grass, Mr. Carteret, I think we should start with the applicant, yeah, unless you want to do otherwise.
Okay, thanks.
What happened?
All right.
I thought I blew the
Mr.
computer
Warger,
up.
please. I'm not sure what we did there. Did we just crash the computers?
I'm not sure if I did or not.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
We're a little wary of technology. Mr.
Making
Warger.
noise and all that up here, yeah.
Thank
Darn, I was
you.
hoping he'd go first, and I'd just say I agree and go on about the business. But my name's Steve Warger with Renaissance Infrastructure Consulting, offices at 5015 Northwest Canal Street, Riverside, Missouri. Here tonight on behalf of Cooper Land Development, representing them related to the pool site in what we are calling Cunningham. Not too long ago, you approved Cunningham's second plat, which is along the easterly border of Creekmore along Madison. This comes in the drive that you see, that lane, I can't read it, I forget what it was, Grandshire Lane or whatever, comes in. That's the one that ties into Madison. That's about one lot deep. It ties into Madison and comes in that main area of Creekmore. So this would be the pool for the east side of the development as we continue forward. Basically, we've got the pool. I think we've seen the staff report. We've seen the comments and conditions. We've addressed all but deciding on how we are going to do our perimeter landscaping, and that's just one of the conditions there, and we'll work with staff to get that resolved. Mm-hmm. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Knowing us, we'll probably call you back. We just
That's
like
fine.
to
That's
get
fine.
you your exercise.
I need the exercise.
So Mr. Grass or Mr. Carteret, if you would, give us the staff report on case 17028, please.
Sir, thank you. As the applicant indicated, Mr. Steve Warger is here representing Cooper Land Development, the developer for the Creekmore subdivision. And they are here this evening to request site plan approval for the community pool located in the Cunningham at Creekmore second phase. I've included in your staff report a couple aerial photographs and some site photographs of the site. You can see the property photographs. You can see the view looking from Grandshire Lane and Bentwater Drive looking southwest of the property. This shows the entrance of the sidewalk where the entrance to the pool will exist in the future. The next image is going to show the view from Grandshire Lane and Bentwater looking northeast. So you'll see again the entrance to the site across from the parking lot. This is on the opposite side of where the pool will be located. In the future, there will be a couple homes constructed on these lots that you see there. Then the last picture is the view from the parking lot looking to the south. You can see eventually there'll be a sidewalk there that will connect. The site's already been graded for the most part, and it's ready to be developed pending approval of the site plan this evening. The site is currently zoned PUD, a planned unit development district, and the existing uses to the north and south are single-family residential. There's some agricultural single-family residences to the east, and the golf course exists directly to the west. The site is about 0.55 acres, or about 23,800 square feet, and as I mentioned, it is part of the Cunningham at Creekmore second plat. The growth management plan, the future land use map identifies this area as appropriate for low-density residential development. The major street plan classifies North Madison Street as a major collector and Grandshire Lane as a local street. Tonight did not require advertisement in the city newspaper because it is just a site plan approval. As I mentioned, they are seeking to obtain approval for their site plan for the pool Cunningham neighborhood. I've noted a couple previous actions on the property. The preliminary plan and memorandum of understanding for the Creekmore subdivision were approved back in January 26th of 2004. And as the applicant mentioned, the Cunningham at Creekmore second plat was approved by City Council on July 10th of this year. However, that plat has not yet been recorded. Construction crews are actively working to build out that subdivision as far as the street layout and other public improvements. They are currently working to finish those out as we speak. The engineering division did review this application and provided a couple comments regarding the public utilities that will serve the site, but they did recommend approval. You can see the memorandum on the last page of the staff report for any specific comments that they had. Staff did submit a couple comments regarding the development. For the development standards that apply to the PUD district are indicated below. As far as parking, there's no special parking requirement for a community pool. However, there have been 23 spaces that have been provided, and those have been determined to be sufficient to serve the development. Landscaping requirements have been met per the landscape plan, and as Mr. Warger identified, there's a couple issues that still need to work out as far as what the screening will look like around the pool adjacent to the surrounding properties that will eventually be developed there. The site plan is in compliance with the building standards included in the Unified Development Code. Pedestrian access will be provided to the site. There will be a sidewalk that will be installed along the common tract where the pool is located, and a sidewalk will be connected to the main entrance of the pool. Signage was not submitted as part of the application, and I do not believe the applicant intends to include any signage on the property. However, if they do, they will need to submit a sign application that will need to be approved by the Community Development Department. Because of the minor scale of the project, this application was not shared with the fire district. However, when they reviewed the plat back in July, they did provide a couple comments that were addressed by the developer. Stormwater will be collected on site and drain out of the parking lot onto Bentwater Drive, will drain north and south down Bentwater Drive. The site lighting plan is in compliance with the lighting standards for the city of Raymore. And as far as trash enclosures and screening of mechanical equipment, trash enclosure will not be provided as part of the site plan. All trash receptacles will be included inside of the facility itself. And the screening of the mechanical equipment, all utilities will be included will be screened inside of a utility room, which will be located inside of the pool house itself. The main access to the site will be provided off of Grandshire Lane and Bentwater Drive. And Grandshire Lane, as the applicant indicated, is the main access point off of Madison Street into the Cunningham subdivision. Staff provided 7 revisions that were necessary to the site plan in order to obtain approval of the site plan and issuance of a building permit. And I will note that the applicant has addressed all 7 of those conditions and provided revised drawings to staff, which are not included in your packet this evening. Staff did provide staff proposed findings of fact for your consideration this evening. Moving forward, this is the last step of approval tonight, pending your vote for the site plan. Staff does recommend approval subject to the conditions that are provided below. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, and the applicant is here this evening as well to address any questions you might have. This time, that concludes staff report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Grass. No public hearing, so the case is open for discussion, questions from the commissioners. I'll start with one briefly. So I didn't realize this until this evening and looking at the electronic presentation. So, Mr. Grass, the first page of staff report shows Bentwater Drive running north-south by the pool. Grandshire Lane is the one that comes in from Madison. But the photo at the top of the second page showing lot lines and so forth seems to have Grandshire running north-south and not labeling the street to the side. So just, I know this case isn't going to city council, but one of those two is not correct. Am I right?
Yes, you are correct. I will note that after City Council approved the preliminary, or the subdivision phase, Cunningham at second plat, the developer came forward and added a number of lots. I believe it was 5 lots to the subdivision, and a little bit of a street segment was added to that as well, and that was approved administratively by staff.
Right, that's fine.
However, in doing that, they added another street segment to that, which conflicted a little bit with our addressing policy. If you can see, Grandshire Lane progresses north and then makes a little bit more than a 90-degree turn to the west there,
Right.
Which, according to our address policy, requires a change in street name. So we're working with the developer to, before they record the plat, to decide on a final street name for that segment. What you see here in that picture is more than likely just an error in our GIS information systems, however.
Okay, but I think what I heard you say was it's not firm yet.
Correct.
And it will be correct as filed.
It will be corrected before it is recorded, correct.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Warger, also, if you would, sir. So I'm not really thrilled with the entry to the pool parking lot being offset from Grandshire Lane, but, and I'm on page 7 of staff report. If anybody wants to follow along, staff proposed findings of fact A. Everything complies with the exception of adopted APWA guidelines for intersection spacing. I guess one way would have a minimum offset between 2 access roads intersecting at a local road 75 feet. That clearly is not going to happen here. It's a 20-foot offset as opposed to a 0. I guess maybe I wouldn't have been concerned at all had the 2 gone straight across. You could have come in from Madison, gone straight across to the pool, but I suspect you had reasons for laying it out with the offset, if you wouldn't mind explaining.
Sure, we laid out the lots based on our dimensions and worked through that. And normally I would agree with your concern if it was like a through street or a major location of where you're going to have traffic. Most of the time your conflicts are your worst ones in a subdivision may be in AM and PM peak hours. So I don't imagine you're going to have many people coming home from work and going straight driving into the pool and otherwise with that. Yeah, it is a concern. It's something that we thought about when we did that. Well, we figured with the minimal amount of traffic and where we were located, and at least you have if we were right on a main intersection or main drag, that would be something different. And we're probably going to have, what I think on this side, there's 300 or 400 lots at the most within this whole deal, and we have 2 accesses, so the traffic volumes there will not be that great. And so we went ahead and just did an offset to fit the lots the way we had it laid out, coming from the north and the south.
And I did see kind of a plus with the pool access being a little further south. If it were aligned with the road from Madison, that would make it awfully close to March Lane or whatever it is to the north. So this gives it a little bit of relief from that.
Correct. And again, I don't think if there's not enough traffic or volume in there to really be a concern.
I'm happy you thought of it. Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Warger.
Thank you.
While Mr. Warger's at the podium, do other commissioners have questions? And I will note for the record, Commissioner Bowie is here.
Yeah, I had a quick question. And I don't know if you guys have talked about the parking spaces. Kind of where'd you land at 23? I think, what was the reason, kind of a larger community? Tell me why you stopped it or felt 23. Was it where you boxed in because of space and size or to stop
Well,
at
basically, we just went in, it fit well to have the 23 based on where the building is. There are no requirements that I'm aware of, and I think
Right.
David mentioned that before, that there's nothing there that requires a certain number. We weren't necessarily locked into that, but we felt like that was sufficient for a pool as far as 23 people being there. And if you go around the different pools, a lot of times people walk when it's this close, and the people that are driving will be minimal unless there's some sort of party or something like that, and that doesn't happen that frequently. So I think that's more than enough for the, especially for the pool size in that area. I mean, if you're going to have something really big, you're probably going to go up to the main clubhouse and have the pool and stuff there, the
Yeah,
parties or whatever at that
I was just
location.
curious about maybe overflow or something, you know, if you do have a large party or something that and everybody drives over. Not that that'll happen often, obviously, that it
Right,
won't.
and I can double check that and let staff know. I don't know that they would really actually even reserve this for necessarily a party type thing. I would imagine Cooper or the homeowners association would probably rather force them up to the clubhouse in that area where there's
Yeah.
more sufficient parking.
Maybe
and
having limited parking
facilities.
might force them out of that and not
Yeah.
say, yeah, so.
Well, and now that they've got the other facilities up at the clubhouse to where if they were
Right.
doing something like that, now I guess they got a full-service restaurant or whatever in there, which
Okay.
makes it a little more attractive.
All right, thank you.
Am I correct that there would be some additional on-street parking down along the pool? I mean, that's not going to conflict with a home.
No, it'd be
So-
no different than having parking there if there was a house there. So
Right,
if you
except
went up
that-
and down Bentwater, you'd have a little bit of room there to park if you wanted to.
Yeah, that lot appears to be, about the width of 2 or 3 residential
One,
lots.
two, about 3.5.
Yeah, so there's some significant amount of on-street
That'd be,
parking
what,
for overflow.
200. We probably got 7 or 8 extra spots out there if they
Yeah.
get to it.
Okay. Not like they're going to be in somebody else's.
No,
Front
they're not
yard
gonna be
or
in their
blocking.
driveway or blocking in their
Yeah, that's a
driveways or
good thing.
that type of deal.
Any other questions while Mr. Warger's at the podium? No?
I could come back if I.
I know. I just try not to run you unnecessarily, Mr. Grass.
I would just like to note that the applicant sort of already addressed it, but I would just like to add for the record that staff did have conversations with Mr. Crass and the Public Works Department regarding the offset of Grand Shire Lane and the entrance, and we share the same sentiments because of its low intensity as a community pool. We don't foresee a lot of traffic being generated to this destination at intersection. So even though it's not in compliance with the APWA standards, we're okay with moving away from that for this case.
Right. I would have agreed. I just didn't want to assume when Mr. Warger's here. I figured let's get it straight from the architect. So thank you. Are there any other questions or comments about this case?
Mr. Chair?
Mayor Turnbow.
Yeah, as a follow-on to Mr. Bowie's question, I see on the diagram that there is a pavilion also outlined on there. I assume that's a shelter house type facility, so which would lend itself to potential gatherings. And so I was just kind of curious about how, again, on follow-on to his question about the number of parking spots, if that would be sufficient if there were visitors to, not only to the pool, but a potential party situation at the pavilion. Is it a covered shelter house? I haven't
Right, and
really read
normally
it
with a
into.
pool, especially they're there because it's sunny and hot, they normally have some sort of cover as far as with the pavilion being there, like a gazebo type thing, an open type venue to where you can put chairs or whatever, it gets shaded in there. I don't anticipate this, and again, like I said, I can check with the developer and find out what the restrictions are on the pool as far as events that they would have there. I'll let you know.
As far as you know, based on other pools in Creekmore, this pavilion basically exists to serve the pool.
The pool, yeah,
Shade.
that's basically for the pool.
Right.
Again, I think their whole central, basically, they kind of promised us or showed this in their plan, they would have it here, but they would like to have everybody at the clubhouse and at the main facility.
Sure.
That's where they're going to.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Commissioner Sarsfield.
I don't see any sizes for the pavilion or the swimming pool,
Signs?
unless I missed it somewhere.
Mr. Grass?
Sizes, well, that'd be on the, I'd have to look at the
Sizes?
architectural
I'm
plans.
sorry. Yeah, it's scaled.
That's part of the architect stuff, not the engineer.
You're the engineer, right?
I got to sneak.
Sorry for the insult earlier.
Hey,
Never mind.
I mean, it's hard, I just want to get it straight. I mean, depending on the size of the pavilion or the size of the swimming pool would indicate to me that do we need more additional parking or we don't need additional parking? If the pavilion only holds, let's say, 4 picnic tables, we're not going to have 200 people under there.
No.
You know, that type of thing.
But kind of on the same note, if it's just a gazebo with 1 picnic table, okay, I get it, but if it's 4 or 5 picnic tables in a large area, kind of what
Well,
was said
that's
before.
why I said the size.
Then yeah, if the parking may become an issue if it's not addressed.
If you can see now, hopefully on your screens, you'll be able to see a site plan or a layout of what the pool house would look like, and as I scroll down, you'll see about what the pavilion will look like eventually. The dimensions of it are 32 by 64, so it's a fairly moderate size.
It's a big size.
Right.
32 by 64 is a nice size.
There it is, okay.
That ain't 1 picnic table.
Part of that is the restroom, though. Which one is that?
Mr. Chair, could ask a
Mayor
question?
Turnbow, please.
Steve, I assume that this is just restricted to residents only, though? I mean, and their guests, so to speak, so.
Yes, that would be true.
I mean, I would assume there'd be some pre-planning prior to any use of that facility anyway, as far as guest sizes, street parking potential, that type of thing.
Correct.
There is some available street parking because of the length of the property along, what's the name of that street that?
Well,
Bentwater.
Bentwater right now,
It'll probably be, I think it's Bentwater is what we agreed on, is what we were
Bentwater.
doing, so.
Anyway, I assume you could put another 15 or 20 vehicles out there along the
If
street as well.
necessary, if necessary, in between and up and down, so we
Sure.
should be okay with that.
yeah. I think it looks good, but it still never hurts to ask. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on case 17028?
I'd be happy to take a stab at it.
Oh, great.
Looks like a good project. I would make a motion that we accept the staff proposed findings of fact and approve case number 17028 Cunningham at Creekmore Community Pool Site Plan and subject to the conditions as outlined in staff recommendations.
And I'll second.
Yep. So we have a motion by Mayor Turnbow, second by Commissioner Meiske, to accept staff proposed findings of fact and approve case 17028 Cunningham at Creekmore Community Pool Site Plan, subject to the conditions noted in staff report. Does that sound about right? Is there any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 7 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. All right, thank you, Mr. Warger.
Thank you all.
Steve?
And that takes us to our second item this evening under new business. Discussion item on potential UDC amendments regarding solar energy, accessory dwelling, and our favorite topic, animals. Uh-oh. The hornets are stirring. Mr. Cataract, Mr. Gress, are you ready for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll start this evening on this particular topic. As you recall, back in June, the commission completed the annual review of the Unified Development Code. At that time, there were three specific items that the commission pulled from the amendment that was moving forward for the UDC for further review, further discussion. So we brought those three topics back to you this evening for further discussion. Pending your discussion, we would then look for, if you want to move forward with an actual amendment, direction to have staff prepare what would be the 26th Amendment to the UDC. We would schedule that for public hearing and go through the formal process. But first this evening, we just wanted to have general discussion, perhaps gauge some consensus on whether to move forward with any of these three items or all of these three items. That is entirely up to the commission. But we'll handle them individually if we would. I think that's probably the best way. They're three very distinct, separate topics. But the first topic that we'll discuss will be in section 405-040. This is the keeping of animals section of the UDC. What staff had proposed back in June was a simple clarification of code. So we weren't looking necessarily at increasing the areas of where the keeping of chickens and fowl would be allowed in the city, other than identifying if you have a property that's zoned R1 and it has at least 3 acres in size, because we have a number of R1 zone properties that are quite large. But right now, the keeping of animals in the R1 is not allowed, the keeping of chickens or similar fowl. What we thought we would do in keeping with our RE district is allow the keeping of chickens and fowl in the R1 district if you have at least 3 acres. So that was the clarification we were trying to include in code. I believe at the annual review, there was some discussion of looking at what some other cities are doing regarding the topic, which we've done a number of times. This would be probably, that I can recall, the third time it's come in front of the commission. Yeah. The last discussion that was had on this topic was a joint work session that the commission had with city council. That goes back to 2014. So it's been a while since we've had this discussion. At that time, there was no, if you would know, interest in changing the current limitation that we have and keeping it just ag and RE. I can tell you there are a number of communities in the area that do allow a small number of chickens on residential lots. So if you look at Belton, which is the city that most recently changed their code, they have kind of a standard of 4 chickens on a small residential lot. Lee Summit also allows it, Kansas City, KCMO allows it, Grandview and Harrisonville all allow chickens on smaller residential lots. Now, when I say that, they have a number of policies, if you would, and requirements for how you care for the chickens and the facilities, et cetera, the cleanliness, the maintenance of all that. Quite a few standards that have been prepared. They're pretty common. They're standard. Nothing really special that any of these communities necessarily do. The communities that do not allow in our vicinity would be Raymore, Peculiar, and Pleasant Hill. Those 3 communities, last I checked, still do not allow keeping of animals on the smaller lots. So that's currently where we're at. Again, I think it's a topic that does need to be looked at occasionally, and so that's why we want to bring it forward. If we're not changing it to the other, to allow it on the smaller lots, we would request that we change it for clarification for the R1 as we initially recommended. At this time, this is not staff's recommendation to go beyond that. It is still staff's recommendation that we keep with not allowing it on residential lots, anything less than 3 acres in size. But that concludes our comments at this time. I did not specifically provide you with what the standards would be if you wanted to allow it. What we, as far as the keeping of the chicken coop and the screening, the fencing and all of that, we certainly could prepare those standards. If your direction is to move forward with an ordinance that would allow it on small lots, we would do a compendium ordinance in our animal control code of the city code to address all of those factors as far as maintenance and care and upkeep, et cetera, because there are good examples out there to utilize. So we're certainly willing to do that if it is your direction to move forward. But I think that concludes staff comments at this time on that topic.
Sure. Commissioners, discussion on the keeping of animals?
I've got a question.
Commissioner Bowie?
If I will, I just want to make sure I understand this right, the way it reads, if that's okay, just to get some clarification. 3-acre minimum lot size, correct?
That'd be correct.
And as it reads, 1 head of cattle, or 2 sheep, or 2 goats, or 2 horses, per acre. I just want to make sure I'm reading that right.
Yes, that would be correct.
That would be on a 3-acre, on a minimum 3-acre, it would be 3 cattle,
That would be correct.
6 sheep, 6 goats, or 6 horses. Is that, am I reading that correct?
You are, it's really based on grazing acre as well, so, but that's standard, yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was reading that correct. Thank you.
Right. So I'm guessing grazing acre would be probably less than the total lot size.
Slightly less. I mean, we're pretty lenient with that, but we do want to exclude where the home actually would be, if there's a home on the property where the home would actually be.
All right. Other questions, comments?
Mr.
Mayor
Chair.
Turn, oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry. Can I go to Mayor Turnbow next? And
go
then come
right
back?
ahead.
Jim, I was just, I was curious on, what is the growing interest in this particular thing that has you all bringing it forward to us at this time? Is there a particular growing interest within the community for this particular addendum?
We are only bringing this forward to allow the keeping of chickens on the 3-acre lots zoned R1. So staff is not bringing this forward to try to allow it on our smaller subdivision lots. That was not our intent. Our intent simply was we allow it right now in our ag districts, which are 10-acre lots. We allow it in our RE, which are 3-acre lots. But we have a number of R1 properties of greater than 3 acres. We thought it was fair, if you have 3 acres, to be able to keep chickens in that R1 zoning. That was the only intent that staff had moving this forward. Because as I indicated before, we do not support allowing the keeping of chickens on smaller residential lots, anything smaller than the 3 acres. That's just been our position from the very beginning, and we continue to hold that position. So we only wanted to bring it forward simply for that one clarification.
Okay. I think it makes sense. The catch with this proposed change is it opens the door, and then we tend to go wild and want to re-examine maximum numbers of cattle or sheep or other, and I guess I would lean towards simple is better if we do go ahead with this, to allow chickens and similar on R1 lots greater than 3 acres. I guess I would really prefer to keep it simple in terms of, sounded like there is a lot of potential code in terms of, I don't know, it sounds like micromanaging to me. And again, I hope we have a public nuisance ordinance if things get out of control.
We certainly do, sir. We have a public nuisance section of the code, and we have an animal control section of the code.
So I would hope we don't ever find ourselves there, but I'd rather keep this section of 405-040D unencumbered or straightforward so that people can understand what it's saying. Other comments? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Sarsfield, and I think Commissioner Meiske, I forgot to get back to you.
Who's going? Okay, thank you. The reason I brought it up was a lot of people cannot, whether you have 3 acres or 10 acres, they cannot, how many people can afford a cow be on their property, or 3 of them, or a horse, maybe a goat or 2. But I was associating with the chickens is, first of all, people want to get eggs. And I'm associating with the size of the animal was in relationship to, like in where I live, and I wanted chickens. And my sons both raised chickens. They were in Peculiar and in, of course, Oklahoma. That's not here, but still. The point is that they are smaller than most dogs. They are noisier they are quieter than most dogs. Every house around me has at least 3 dogs in their yard. And when one starts barking, the other one, so it's not a noise thing. It have a little once in a blue moon when they're feeding. The other thing was that they are considered pets also. They're not just livestock. So as far as restrictions, as far as a limit of 3 or 4, I agree with that, or whatever the animal shelter people believe that, you know, what it should be to do it, and the size of the caging for the animals and the height of it and all that, that is fine. That's all well and good. Just like we have ordinances for, you have to, when you walk the dog in the park, you have to bring the super duper bag with you to scoop it up and so forth. I mean, we can have those laws, same thing for the chickens, and I'm sure if there was a farmer out there that kept his manure pile right next to the road, you'd have a lot of phone calls at City Hall saying someone's got to clean it up. So as far as that goes, I don't think that's an issue. Just put it on paper so people know what the issue is. I just thought that 3 acres is an exaggeration of property that you own, and how many homes are in Raymore that are less than 1 acre, an average size lot, compared to the few homes that are 3 acres and more. I'm sure it's about 80% that are single. Am I guessing wrong on that? Opposed to how many houses and property owners that have more than 3 acres that could afford bigger animals. So I think we're restricting the population of families, giving them the option if they want to, fine. If they don't want to, fine. They have cats, they have dogs. And I've heard a few people have weasels and gophers, and they go to the vets, and they have all kind of pets that they keep around. Why not chickens? And there's a benefit to chickens, more so than throwing your ball to Rover. That's all.
Let me see if I can get to the other end of the table finally, sorry. Commissioner Meiske?
Okay, don't look at me like that. We limit to what's written in here, but is there anything about potbelly pigs, miniature horses, you know, other animals like that people may consider a pet?
There are, sir, yes, but in the animal control code, so it wasn't part of what we
Okay.
adopted in the UDC, but there are other provisions for
Okay.
specifically potbelly pigs and other similar animals.
Okay, I was just curious why we were picking on chickens rather than the other.
Well, so
No pun intended.
I do remember, and I think Mr. Cataret and I are probably remembering similar history, but I do remember that people have approached the city wanting to be able to keep chickens in areas where they were not permitted. And I don't know, as Commissioner Sarsfield said a minute ago, chickens seem to be an item of special interest. I don't necessarily think I would consider chickens domestic, but I don't really want to slice it too finely because I think I actually had a pet chicken when I was a kid. I think he ended up fried for dinner, but that's beside the point. We typically don't do that to pets, but this one was a cute little chick and then grew and became really obnoxious. I think he was a rooster, by the way, but that's been quite a few decades ago. Commissioner Armstrong, did you want to say something also?
Yes, first of all, thanks for the time spent in looking at what was going on in the surrounding areas. I think in part that was due to my question prior. I know in some of the code that I've looked at, there are restrictions on coop placement and size and that type of thing. Is that not required in this, or is it addressed elsewhere, or what was the thinking there? If we're allowing it, do we need to speak to those issues?
Under current code, the code does not speak to that, to any specifics on the care or the arrangements made for the chickens as far as feed locations, you know, the coop locations, things of that nature. Our code is silent on chickens entirely, other than what you see before you here. If we were to add something beyond what we talk about with the 3 acres, I don't think the location of the coop at 3 acres is important. But when you get down to a 1/4 acre lot, I think it's very important. So if we were to look at allowing it on smaller lots, we'll get into those standards. And again, I think the standards are very typical amongst the communities that I've seen. They're very similar from one community to the next as far as how they regulate the chickens once they allow them.
I guess my only thought would be if there is any consideration to allowing a smaller lot size, then that code should be consistent probably between. And so if you're going to address that in the future, you may want to consider addressing it here as well.
Absolutely will. What we didn't want to get into, we want the UDC, as Chairman Faulkner indicated, the UDC just to be specific on whether you can have the animal or not have the animal on your property. That anything beyond that, as far as how that animal is kept on the property, is in our animal control code. So we'll reference it from here, and we would bring both forward at the same time, because it's all one package.
I see.
But we want to keep those restrictions out of the UDC.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess I could see several approaches to this. We could say, no, we're not changing it at all, or we could go for what I perceive as a relatively minor change in its intent, and that was basically, as Mr. Cataret said, we currently allow chickens in Ag and RE. We would simply allow them in an R1 that was greater than 3 acres, which is essentially a similar type of property. So I could see making a change similar to what's proposed. That is a stepwise change. It gives us an opportunity to learn and see if it's valuable. And as we've learned over several years with the UDC, it's a living document. We're up to what? Revision 25, 25th Amendment. So, you know, it wouldn't bother me a bit to take a step, reevaluate it later, and take another step if it seems warranted. Or we could just go for broke and say, hey, we want to take chickens further and allow them on smaller R1 lots. So I'm just throwing those out for
We
options.
just got to be careful about R1, you know, other residents, you know, in R1. You know?
Yeah. It's
and they may be against chickens as pets or chickens, so we got to be careful about that as well.
I like the current ordinance or the current proposal because it doesn't open that bag of worms, but it does take what I think is potentially a step forward. It's a baby step. Commissioner Armstrong.
Having not been part of the prior conversations, could you help me understand what staff concerns are? If your recommendation is to stay at 3 acres, what the concerns are with smaller acreage? Because if it's been raised several times over the last 4 or 5 years, there's clearly some sort of community interest.
I agree with you. But when I think when we speak of community interest, I've had less than 5 residents approach me over the years that I've been here wanting to have chickens. I think it's just those vocal, very vocal few that have gotten this in front of council in the past for discussion. But that's fair. I think they had something they wanted to do and changed the code and brought it forward. Staff's position on the topic has always been, how I look at residential property is what you would expect when you move into a residential subdivision of 1/4 acre lots. You don't expect that you would see chickens in the backyard of a small 1/4 acre property. You expect to see them on acreage property. The 3 acres, the larger property is very common. That's why people move to rural areas. That's why we created the rural estate zoning district, to take care of those larger acre properties so they could have a couple of horses, a couple of goats, whatever, you know, livestock to a limited number on their property. But I'm just one of the believers that I think by far the majority of individuals that move into these subdivisions do not expect that their neighbor could bring 4 chickens on the property. And the effects that those animals have in a residential area would impact the other properties, and that would be my concern, the impacts that it has on the other properties. I don't disagree with your comments about noise and that. I get it. Other animals that we allow can be very noisy, but I think people understand that that's part of our society. That the keeping of cats and dogs is just that you would expect a neighbor to be able to do that. I don't believe most people expect a neighbor to be able to keep chickens. And that's the real objection staff has always had to this proposal.
Go ahead.
And I guess I would give a different point of view. I think that it's less unexpected than you would realize. It is common among certain populations, especially a younger population, which is one of the people we want to attract. And I would worry about creating code just to meet expectations. Typically, we're looking for some type of infringement on somebody else's right, I would think, to make that into city code. So can you help me understand what the impact, you spoke of the impact on surrounding community members. Can you explain to me what impact you're seeing?
There's a lot of study out there on the impacts of keeping an animal like a chicken on your property, the impact of what other animals it draws in because of the fact that you have the chickens there, the fact that you have the eggs there, the fact that you have the feed there. It comes down to how the property is maintained. But anybody you probably have all worked with chickens. They draw in other types of animals that you don't want to see in a residential neighborhood, things that we get other types of complaints on, larger animals that prey on the chickens if they're not properly kept, if they're not properly maintained. It's just, again, that, and I think code is written for expectations. I think code is very specifically written for that's part of the whole basis for zoning is expectations. That when you buy a property, you want to know what your neighbor can and cannot do, and that's why we have that code. It's very specific on what that neighbor can and cannot do. And I think that's the whole basis for my concern on this is, when you start looking at what can happen to a residential property when you keep 4 chickens on it, what they would do to that, it'd be in the backyard of that property, the impacts it would have in the backyard of that property aesthetically, just how it's kept, is something that, in my opinion, I don't think Raymore should allow in our residential areas. I just don't think that's the community that we're trying to create here. And so I keep promulgating that, and until the code changes, if you direct it to be changed, that I can certainly accept that and will properly prepare the code amendments. But I just feel that in all my discussions that I deal with residents, by far a majority would not want to see this. I don't disagree. There's some out there that want it, but I think by far the majority would not want it. But that's, again, that's just based upon the comments that I've heard not only in our community, but in other communities, in fact, communities that have allowed it as well. So
Can I ask a question, if I will? Is that okay? Sure. I'm sorry. Is it, what, I understand those impacts that you're saying. I definitely see that. I'm thinking of when I go down Ward Road from, if I go down 58 all the way to Ward Road, and then I go north, north, about a mile or 2 down on the left-hand side. All right, my accountant, my tax guy, is chickens, right? In that little area that's right before, on the left-hand side, before you get to Raintree. And there's chickens over there, all right? And some of those, that area, there's some mobile housing over that area, and there's some chickens. And I totally understand that. I guess my point is, what made you, is the 3 acres new, or is that something you're introducing with the possibility of R1, or was that already in the, it was already there for the ag and the RE, but it wasn't in there? Was the 3 acres something you're introducing now as you introduce R1 to this?
No, the RE, the minimum lot size for RE is 3 acres.
Okay.
So it's automatically allowed in any RE zoned area. We introduced it to the R1 for those R1 lots that are at least 3 acres.
So why did you say 3? Why not say 5? I'm just curious. Why didn't you say 5 for the R1 as opposed to 3? What made you say 3?
Again, just to be consistent, if we allow it on a 3-acre RE lot, it makes sense to allow it on a 3-acre R1 lot. So just for consistency.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
Commissioner Meiske? Yeah, I'll go to Commissioner Meiske first, then I'll get back to you.
I lived in the country for 17 years. That's 17 acres, by the way. When we moved into Raymore, we were looking for a subdivision. We were looking for home association. We were looking for rules, things like that. I've got to agree with staff that, yes, I don't want to move into a subdivision that's got rules and then find out that my neighbor's going to have chickens. If I wanted chickens next door, I would stay in the country. That's not the purpose of me moving into a subdivision, so that's, I agree. I mean, people move into subdivisions, they expect a city-type living, not a country-type living. If they want to live in the country, then they can go buy 3 acres and...
No, more than 3 acres.
5? Yeah, right. Commissioner Sarsfield?
I understand all that, but you know what? I don't think it would, like you said, a few people might be interested in holding chickens. So for the 40,000 or 20,000 houses that are in Raymore, apartments and so forth, let's say 100 people, I do not think that's going to put Raymore on the no one wants to live here list. If Harrisonville does it, and the Summit does it, and stuff, and their communities are growing like crazy. So it doesn't seem like people are voting their districts because a couple people want to have chickens. That taken care of. If the rules allow it, maybe you don't want chickens next door to you, but I don't want to live near 25 dogs either. But that's the way it is, and I have to live with it. Now, also in Raymore, there are communities that that you're not allowed to plant roses in. You can't plant this bush in. You can't do that. The homeowners, they have their extra set of rules opposed to what the city has. So for the few houses that are in Raymore that don't belong to association or anyone else, I think we're restricting these people and enjoying a little bit of life of holding a couple chickens. If you want to live in the $4 million house and have the golf club next to you, wonderful. But not all of us can afford 3 or 5 acre farm, or I would have bought one to raise chickens and some other animals. We're not all Rockefeller, so to speak. So I have my little 1/4 acre lot house, and as far as the chickens disrupting, bringing in other animals, I have been catching squirrels. I got 56 of them this year already, and I transport them out into the country. And in the process of me catching squirrels, I got 2 coyotes in their yard. I had 7 possums and 14 raccoons. Now, I have no chickens in my yard, I have no cat food, and I have no dog food out. I have all these rodents still coming through my property. So I don't think, what am I going to attract? A water buffalo? A camel? I'm being facetious on purpose. I don't think there's any more livestock going to come through my yard before or after the chicken event, or at anybody else's yard. And there are some yards in my neighborhood that are spotless. They have 4 and 5 dogs. And then there's some that have 2 that looks like a bulldozer needs to be put in place. And as far as unsightly, we know a few months ago someone came in from the city council complaining about someone having 20 cars on their property and everything else. I think that's a lot more unsightly than a couple chickens. Not to mention the fact the cars are still there. And the people are still living beside the people that have the unsightly yard and everything else. So a couple of chickens, I think, is putting a restriction on because, and if you go to the library, and this will be my final comment, you find a book on how to raise chickens, 90% of them are on kids having pets and what kind of chickens are friendly and what to do, and they're made under kids for pet books, not the farmer section. So it isn't like it was maybe 40 years ago when we had the extra chicken in the pot because it was the Depression. That's all I have to say.
So
Thank you for putting up with me.
Oh, you're good, you're good. Are we voting on each of these separately or all together?
Well, my intent, which I haven't tried out on you yet, this came before us as a discussion item. My intent would be we could either, at the end of the remaining two topics, we could make a motion, which I think is probably not necessary, giving staff guidance, or I think Mr. Cataret's and Mr. Gress' intent was to get guidance from us on each of the three separate items. So here's a proposal. Let me float it and see how it goes. What I would propose, so that we can move on from the first discussion item, keeping of animals, what I would propose is I'd like to ask for 3 shows of hands, and noting that we have 2 commissioners absent this evening, so it won't really be what I'd call authoritative, but the first show of hands would be raise your hand if you want to leave code alone, not change it at all. The second would be raise a hand if you want to include R1 greater than 3 acres in with the current allowance for RE. And the third would be a separate independent show of hands to see if there's interest in pushing further with chickens and allowing chickens on smaller acreage. So that was my thought.
Are we allowed to vote more than once?
And Mr. Cataret, would that give you any guidance whatsoever if we do those 3 shows of hands?
Yes, sir, I think it would, although I am interested in the answer to her question.
I don't see any reason why you couldn't raise a hand more than once, because that's really 3 separate directions to guide staff, and I hate to leave staff just hanging out there. But remember that my first show of hands, let's try this and see what happens. My first show of hands is raise a hand if you do not want to change keeping of animals at all. Any hands? Okay, so you got nothing for the status quo. My second, raise a hand if you'd like to include R1 greater than 3 acres in the current ordinance.
Wait a minute, read it again.
Raise a hand if you would like to add, I'll use better language here, if you would like to add R1 greater than 3 acres or R1 at least 3 acres in with current allowance for ag and RE. Adding R1 to say that. If R1 is greater than 3, we're simply adding it in addition to RE, which is already minimum of 3.
Which is basically the staff proposal.
Right. Yeah, so, and you know, this is a show of hands, but raise a hand if you would like for staff to pursue adding R1 of at least 3 acres in with current allowance for ag and RE. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we got 5, and I assume no hand was not in favor of that. So you got 5 out of 7. And the third proposal is raise a hand if you would like for staff to go further, and it could, in my mind, it could be in lieu of just adding the R1 greater than 3, or it could be a separate step. If you'd like staff to go further and come back to us with a proposed amendment to allow chickens in smaller lot sizes in R1, raise a hand, please. So I have, and we're down to 2. So I think what I'm seeing, you know, commission basically being short a couple of members, but it seems like there is support to add R1 of at least 3 acres. There's not currently support to go beyond that and allow chickens on smaller R1 lots, but that doesn't mean we won't keep coming back to this.
I asked a question earlier, and this is why I kept my hand down, I think, on your second question.
Sure.
I know the 3 acres for consistency purposes, but I am in agreement with what you said and similar to what you said, that, you know, does it have to be 3? I mean, I didn't grow up on a farm and all that, but as you said, if I move into the city and I got 3 acres in the city and I'm saying, oh, I got 3 acres, great. I'm not sure I want to have a chicken. Nothing against chickens at all. I like chickens, but just not sure I'm comfortable. I would be comfortable with it. That's why I kept my hand down on the second question. I think I said it right, but that's it.
Yeah, Commissioner Armstrong.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding the logic there. If we're saying that we're moving into the city because we want to get away from a rural atmosphere, and yet we're okaying goats and horses and sheep and domestic animals on these same lots, on the R1 lots, I don't understand the consistency of the logic. I would also wonder if, as this is an issue that has come up several times, is there a method to look at the community and see what the community's wishes truly are?
Yeah, that is a really good question. How do you get 20,000 people consensus? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. We've done community surveys, we've done I'm forgetting the right word, but community forums.
The conversations.
Yeah.
The community conversations we've had,
Right.
yes.
I will say, I agree, this has not been a large sticking point. I think very simply, you know, if I'm in an R1 zoning with at least 3 acres, I could petition to rezone to RE. If I wanted to be allowed to have chickens under current zoning. This simply allows that without each individual R1 greater than 3 acres having to petition city.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for staff, if I could. What you provided to us tonight, Mr. Cataret, you have down there, it says, note, the minimum lot size of the RE district is 3 acres. If land is zone R1, it is at least 3 acres in size, it is reasonable that chickens and similar fowl be allowed. Is that note part of the actual code? Because I share the same concerns that Mrs. Armstrong does with regard to adding R1 to number 3 there, which then allows for the other animals as well in an R1 lot, where they're allowed now for a state of 3 acres or better. Why would we add R1 for that particular reason now? And now you've added a degree of complexity of allowing all those other animals on R1 lots of like size or larger. I have that same concern now that she stated that. I hadn't really realized that before, because it is added to number 3 there. In number 2, I think I could live with. Why that's R1 is added to number 3, I'm not real sure.
The only reason that I could think of, you know, from a staff standpoint is, again, because we currently allow the keeping of cattle, sheep, goat, and horses on 3 acre lots. If it happens to be zoned RE, we thought that the 3 acres is the commonality. If we have an R1 lot of 3 acres, why couldn't they keep those animals? It's 3 acres. So the commonality was a 3 acre minimum. If you have at least 3 acres, we felt it appropriate to be able to have the animals, the cattle, sheep, goats, and horses. It was just the commonality of the 3 acre minimum.
Yeah. The problem with that is it just kind of eats into your reasoning for what you stated earlier about the degradation of of our areas with regard to allowing it on smaller lots, chickens on even smaller properties. Because now you're telling folks that have lots who might be adjacent to smaller properties that previously didn't have any animals or livestock. Now you're telling them they can, and the potential is to grow from chickens to a couple of sheep, to goats, to horses, that type of thing. So I'm concerned about how that might impact our community as well. Because I agree with you. When I was police chief, we were in a tither over coyotes and had to actually have some degree of thinning out the animals because they were attacking small pets and things in residential areas. So I saw the logic in that about the chickens. Yeah, I'm still, like Dr. Armstrong, I'm still kind of laboring over. I had an R1 on the number 3 there that expands other animals.
I guess my only comment would be to what Chairman Faulkner said, if we pull this out and we have somebody that property is zoned R1 that's over 3 acres and they come in and want to keep animals, we just suggest you rezone it to RE. Because it meets all the requirements for RE, and then suddenly the animals are there. We just didn't think forcing somebody to go to the RE if they have the acreage was a necessary step. That was our logic in putting it in there. But I see both, and we could certainly scratch that out. I think the important item that we wanted was the number 2.
Yeah. Do we want to do a show of hands again with a little more clarification, or? Have we thoroughly befuddled you?
No, wait. If we bring this item forward, it could be amended at that time to however you want that code to be written.
Sure.
As a full commission. So.
And that's the joy of a discussion item, is that we don't have to be too formal about it.
Oh, trust me, that whatever conversation we've had here is going to get even more colorful at the council level.
Oh, I'm quite sure it will. I'm quite sure it will. Does anybody want to beat on urban chickens and keeping of animals anymore, or shall we move on to the second area, accessory dwelling? Mr. Cataret, Mr. Grass?
Thank you, sir. A great conversation so far. I'm looking forward to continuing it for the next set of potential code amendments. So the next one pertains to 3 different code sections. So it's threefold in a way, and the fact that it impacts 3 different sections of our Unified Development Code. But it all relates back to providing alternative options for housing for different types of families in the city, or more specifically allowing accessory dwelling units in an increased amount of our zoning districts that we currently have here in the city of Raymore. The first change would impact section 485.010 of the Unified Development Code, and it would add 2 definitions to clarify. Currently, accessory dwelling is defined in the Unified Development Code, but this would further clarify it and differentiate between an attached accessory dwelling unit and a detached accessory dwelling unit. So an attached accessory dwelling unit would be a unit that is physically attached or located within or inside an existing home. So if you're portioning off a portion of your home to convert it to a living quarters for a grandparent or a grandchild or something similar. Or you could also, within the allotment of the code, you could add on to your property, given that it's still in compliance with other provisions in the UDC. You could add on to your home and convert that as well into an accessory dwelling unit. That would be an attached accessory dwelling unit. A detached would be one that is physically separate from the existing structure and clearly subordinate to the existing or primary structure on the home. So similar to a carriage house that you might see in some older neighborhoods in the Kansas City area, but a definite distinction between what an attached accessory dwelling unit is and a detached accessory dwelling unit. The second item that this would impact would be section 405.020H of the UDC, and that would be the use table in the residential and agricultural zoning districts. Currently, as I mentioned, we allow accessory dwelling units in the agricultural, rural estate, and rural residential zoning districts. Those are a permitted use in all 3 of those zoning districts. Staff has proposed to extend that a little bit and make that a permitted use, attached accessory dwelling units, a permitted use in the ag, rural estate, rural residential, R1A, R1, and R.5 zoning districts. And on top of that, we would recommend making them a permit or a special use in the R1A, R1, and R1.5 zoning district for detached accessory dwelling units. And within those, there would be, as you see, there's the use standard section of that table off to the right-hand side. Within those would be a set of guidelines or design guidelines or, if you will, on what those would look like on the property. So you're not essentially just converting a shed in your backyard to a bedroom. There would be some guidelines and restrictions on what that would look like, how it would be connected to the utilities in the city, and things of that nature. So we've included in the next section, if you follow along to section 420.050E, would differentiate between accessory dwelling units, attached accessory dwelling units, and detached accessory dwelling units, and sort of add some guidelines and restrictions for how those are developed on existing lots here in the city of Raymore. So what you see that's highlighted is sort of what staff has recommended. That we brought this forward to you all at the last UDC amendment, and there was a couple comments that we've addressed through a couple revisions. And you'll see that towards the bottom there's the sections 11, 12, and 13. And those really get into the, I guess, the design guidelines, if you will, for what these accessory dwellings might look like, how they relate to the existing structure on the property, how they're built, and sort of what they look like. So staff has proposed a number of changes here for your consideration, and we're certainly open to a number of comments or suggestions that the staff or the commission may have. But we'd be looking forward to some direction on how you would like to see staff move forward with this to potentially include this in the 26th Amendment for the EDC. So that would conclude staff report on that topic, and we're open to comments and suggestions from the commission.
So, Mr. Grass, I'm looking at the top of the third page, a little paragraph called Topics for Discussion, Parking, and Lot Coverage. Do we need to worry about those yet, or only if we go forward with this?
Those are really just sort of talking points for the discussion this evening. Certainly, Mr. Carteret and I and some other staff members have talked about what, the ripple effects, if you will, of allowing accessory dwelling units in these other zoning districts. You get potentially one more family member on the property. What does that do to the parking requirements for the house? Do the existing parking that exists in the driveway and the garage, does that satisfy the additional parking that might be needed for an accessory dwelling, or do they need to potentially expand on the driveway, and what does that look like for the maximum lot coverage that they're allowed for that zoning district? So those were just sort of to get to some of the moving pieces that this amendment would involve. It's a lot more complex than just allowing these dwelling units in certain zoning districts. There's a lot more that would involve. So those were just sort of some talking points that we had talked through at the staff level that would relate specifically to these changes that we proposed this evening.
Okay, thank you. So,
I got 2 quick points real quick. Just
Commissioner
a couple of
Bowie.
quick points. On the last page, number 8, either existing or accessory should be occupied by the property owner anytime. I guess that's there to kind of make sure that they don't have like another family moving in or something like that. Okay, am I right about that?
Right. That would sort of steer away from property owners, essentially renting out their entire property to somebody else, and keep it true to the meaning of an accessory dwelling. The purpose behind those types of facilities is to accommodate either a grandson or a grandparent who might not be able to live on their own, that needs that support network, but still wants to remain, independent to an extent. So we feel like that would sort of weed out the potential for somebody to own a property, build an accessory dwelling, and all of a sudden they've got 2 rental properties that they can rent out.
Right. Second point, good point. Thanks for clarifying that. Number 13, the entrance to the attached shall be subordinate to the existing structure and shall be less visible from the street than the main entrance. That's obviously, could be a little bit subjective there. Okay, there's some subjectivity there. And I think that's really covered when you talk about, I think, 4 and 5, the total square footage shouldn't be over 1,000 feet. The accessory dwelling should be limited to 6% of the total square footage of the structure. And you also say the height. Number 5, you say the height should not exceed the height. I think you kind of cover number 13 in 4 and 5, if that makes any sense. You already limited how big it can be. how tall it can be, and so I think you kind of cover number 13 when you say that the entrance should be less visible from the, if that makes sense.
To an extent, I would agree with you. I think what staff was sort of getting at with that requirement there was yes, we limit the size and the height of what the accessory dwelling can look like, but for an attached accessory dwelling, if say they were to request to convert their living room that might be in the front of their house to an accessory dwelling unit or a bedroom for their grandparent, that unit is located at the front of their house, so without that, they might be able to, construct a front door right next to their other front door if they wanted to. So the idea behind, not saying that, that would be the case for all, individuals, obviously, but that potential still does exist. So I think the reason behind that was, like I said, that eliminates the possibility of turning a single-family home into a duplex with 2 front doors on the front of the property. Whether that looks like, there's some flexibility in what we could do with this. Does it have to be on the rear of the house, or does it have to be recessed a certain amount of feet from the front door of the primary entrance, or?
So what you could do there is you could say if it's if it's detached, I mean, if it's limited by height and size, if it's detached, I don't think anybody's going to build like a 10-foot door on a 1,000-square-foot house, right? Or whatever that's detached. So maybe if on number 13 you put if it's an attached dwelling, then it has to be subordinate to, if that makes sense.
Right. I think it actually does. I think it actually does say it.
As an attached, yep, it does. Okay, all right. So that kind of negates the detached.
Staff's one ahead of you.
They're one ahead of me, all right. So that.
Just testing the water, so this would be a detached, but would this allow a person on a reasonable sized lot to build a detached garage and put a second floor in it for a residence?
Yes, they would certainly be allowed to do that, provided it met every other criteria in this code. So that would be similar to a carriage house, like they said, that you would see in other parts of the Kansas City area.
Granny flat, I've heard them called all kinds of things, but yeah, okay, thank you. Commissioner Sarsfield.
This must be my night. I'm playing devil advocate here. Question, I don't have, but theoretically, I have a corner lot. My front entrance is on Street A. I have a long, deep lot. My corner side street is Street B. Now, my lot goes uphill. I live in a 2-story house. I'm going to put this back as far as I can on my property. Now it's going to look like a 4-story house, but theoretically it's still a 2-story house, but the ground elevation has changed. Now, there's nothing in the code or mentioning different height and elevation or not being conspicuous. Well, if you look at the front of my house, you don't see the addition for grandma in the back. But when you go up Street B, it's plain as day. It's not being blocked by anything. So I think it needs to be worded better or described better, maybe, or saying that a 2-story dwelling is still a 2-story dwelling wherever it is on your property. That would take care of the height situation. Corner lots, I don't know how you can do that or change that.
I think just overall less subjectivity, if we could kind of pull that out of there somehow. I think it's what you're, kind of similar to what you're saying.
And if I could speak to that, if you reference section E, I believe it's number 5 there. So the accessory dwelling shall not exceed the height of the existing dwelling unit. So even if you have a 2-story existing structure,
It's still a 2-story.
It's still a 2-story. That accessory dwelling unit cannot exceed the height of that 2-story existing structure.
I was just bringing that other stuff into view for other people.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think you have to be very careful whether we're describing an attached or a detached, because there are some differences. Yeah, I'm always actually a little bit perplexed. I don't know, that's probably too strong a word, but I know the trend in building these days is a reverse story and a halves, which I can sort of remember when I first heard of that and said, what does that mean? But you have reverse story and a halves, which basically look like a 1-story from street, and then boop, a couple of doors down will be a 2-story, and you know, clearly there's some varied architecture. It's not cookie cutter, it's not monotonous, but there is a fair amount of diversity in neighborhoods as they exist today. Mayor Turnbow.
I was going to ask, Mr. Carteret, on these items, such as this, where we're talking about attached and detached dwellings, are restrictive covenants of homeowners associations taken into consideration during any inquisition as for permitting processes?
They are not. Our code's very specific to that we do not administer or enforce covenants or deed restrictions that are on a property. We may be aware of them and we may advise somebody of something, but it wouldn't have any bearing on whether we would issue a permit or not.
Okay.
Those, in my mind, those are over and above city requirements, but they're basically independent.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Do we want to try a straw poll and give staff some guidance on accessory dwellings? I've only got one proposal. Show of hands if you want staff to proceed with an ordinance a draft ordinance based on the presentation this evening. How's that sound? Is there another option that we should consider, or we'll just do it?
Did we want to address some of the issues that were topics for discussion? We really hadn't touched on the parking and some of the other things that are in there. Did we want to?
We could this evening. Staff, what's your preference? We could try that this evening, or we could take that as another pass as we go forward with this.
I believe we were just looking for direction on whether you wanted us to keep moving forward and work towards addressing some of these. Obviously, we were looking forward to a discussion on these as well. In addition to that, as we were looking forward to whether the commission would be interested in us pursuing a little more stringent design guidelines for what these need. Obviously, we define, the accessory dwelling needs to be architecturally consistent, but what exactly does that mean? That's a pretty ambiguous statement there. So we'd be curious if there's any interest in this, from the commission, as better defining that. And I mean, we looked at what other cities have done, and from our research, they're pretty consistent with what we have now. There's not really a lot of cities around us that allow accessory dwellings in the majority of our zoning districts like we're proposing this evening. But I believe from the staff level, we're looking at whether or not you would want us to move forward and try and working out some of these issues here.
And as noted earlier, if we have a majority that want to direct staff to proceed with this direction, that would be additional discussion and certainly could be amended or proposed differently as it actually comes forward as a draft.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, let's see how this goes. No hand means don't touch it. Raising a hand means proceed, guidance to staff to proceed with further distinction on accessory dwellings. So anybody that wants to proceed, raise a hand, please. And 3, 4, 5. It's that 5 again. So we have a majority of the commissioners present this evening suggesting guidance to proceed in this direction. But note that we have 2 who did not like the idea, so. I think unless anybody wants to beat on accessory dwellings further, let's move on to solar energy.
If you don't mind, before we move on, I'd just like to clarify, maybe for the commission members who were opposed to that, what are some of the issues that you that you foresee with moving forward, or what are some of the things that staff can work towards addressing to maybe address some of those concerns that you might have for accessory dwelling units? What are some of the things that we can look for in code that might address your concerns?
I don't understand the need for the code. I think the issues are addressed elsewhere in code, and I think this is overly restrictive.
Commissioner Sarsfield.
I don't think it, I mean, we're opening up something that we're leaving a lot of unanswered questions or answers to it. Example number 4, where 60% of the total footage of the existing structure, does that include or does that not include an extra garage? You may want mom and dad living with you, but they have to have a place to park their car. Is there a place? Is the 60% of the dwelling including a garage, not including a garage, only a single car garage or a double car garage? There's a lot of things that aren't mentioned in here, not clarified, to go ahead and say that now a detached dwelling in the back, same thing. Example was given, if you wanted to put in a 2-car garage in the back of your property and put an apartment above it, that is okay because your main purpose is building the garage, how I see it. The extra is an apartment on top of the garages just in case mom and dad want to move in, okay? But your main concern when you're building, if you're doing the permit, you're actually putting in for a 2-car garage, if I understand that right, because that's the primary purpose of the detached building. The added on apartment on the second floor, so to speak, is an add-on in more ways than one, no play on words. So do they have to have a garage there with that separately, or an extra driveway getting to it? Does the driveway have to connect with the other driveway? I mean, I think there's a lot of things that need to be clarified.
Some of that, I think, is already in code, allowable driveways to a residence, but yeah, I don't disagree.
And as far as postal things, I don't see a problem. A lot of areas say if you live on 102 Lakeview Drive, there's 102R for the rear of the property, for a second address. So you don't have to change a bunch of numbers or whatever, make it a half, just make it rear.
Good. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was our intent. I feel like we're punishing you sufficiently for all your efforts. Okay. Let's try solar energy systems while we're on a roll.
Thank you. So moving on to the last proposal that deals with section 420.070I, and this would deal specifically to renewable energy systems, but more specifically solar energy systems within the city of Raymore. We brought this forward to the commission again with our last UDC amendment, and there wasn't really a whole lot of concern with the proposal that we had suggested. However, a couple commission members suggested that we look to our neighbors and figure out what other cities are doing with specifically regards to the placement of roof-mounted systems on existing structures in the city of Raymore. Originally, we had proposed that that property owners would be restricted to placing solar panels specifically on side or rear-facing roof faces of their homes. And in doing that, there's the potential that that sort of restricts the solar capability or capacity that a property owner might have, given the orientation of their house, whether it faces north, south, east, or west. You sort of limit the ability that they have to produce solar-powered energy. So we did a little bit of research at what the other communities are doing, and there really isn't a whole lot of language on restricting the placement of solar-powered panels on roofs. You know, if the way it was phrased last time with the previous amendment was that they're restricted to the rear-facing roof or the side-facing roofs unless they can prove that that is an obstruction to, like I said, the production of solar-powered energy. And in that case, they would request a variance, and that would obviously be a hardship or obstruction, and they would be granted the variance more than likely. So rather than forcing them to go through that process and reach the same ends no matter what, staff has decided to remove that requirement and not enforce a restriction of where they can place it on the roof. Instead, that would be left up to an HOA or a property owners association whether or not they would allow it. So the city would allow it on our end. However, they would have to obviously go through and get approval from an HOA or a POA before we can issue the permit.
Right, good, and thank you. That was a good recap of past discussion. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is Community Bank of Raymore with, if I remember right, and I'm not sure I do, but they have solar on the roof facing east and solar on the roof facing west, both. And simply because of the architecture of the building, it would not have been practical to try to hide the solar like we do roof-mounted equipment otherwise.
Correct. Typically on a flat roof, you would have a parapet that would shield that or screen that from view, but on a hipped roof similar to what Community Bank of America has, that just wasn't possible.
Yeah, and I don't find it to be a nuisance at all. In fact, I think it's pretty cool.
I did find in my research that there's not necessarily restrictions on the placement of the solar panels. However, there were a couple of cities that had restrictions on the color of the panels. And I've never really seen solar panels or any other color than black or a dark shade of gray.
Right.
But there were some code restrictions on how that related to the color of the shingles. However, we elected not to place that in our code.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Yeah. Commissioner Meiske.
I got a couple of questions. If we go forward with this, are we going to allow grandfathering in here?
I would believe so. It'd be.
I mean, I know of several that I don't know if they meet these codes. One of them is out here on J Highway. It's, I think, a fitness center or something. They have those. The other one that I know of, that doctor, and I can't remember his name, that owns that property, he's got a whole ton of them. I don't know if they meet this.
Dr. Carroll, yes.
Carroll, that's his name.
Those would have been installed, with or without a permit. There's really no way to individually track which ones were done with or without a permit, but
right.
Those would have been installed prior to these provisions in the UDC, so they would more than likely be grandfathered in and accepted under their current conditions.
Okay, my other question is there any difference between a business doing this as opposed to a homeowner as far as setback goes, as far as putting it on the roof, not putting it on the roof, that kind of stuff? How many panels you can have?
There are a couple provisions here specifically on the roof mounted, or I guess there would be in both of them as well, but in regards to the screening on the roof. On a residential structure, you would not be required to screen the solar panels from the view of the street or an adjacent property, but for a commercial property you would, and that would be done through, like I said, a parapet of the roof,
right,
or some sort of screening to shield that from the right of way or a street or an adjacent property owner. But that would be the only differentiation between a residential installation and a commercial installation.
Do we want to make as far as agriculture or R1 or any of that, and break it out even further? I don't know, I'm just asking. Because you got residential and commercial, but that's the only identifiers I see.
True.
So,
and I see what you mean on an agriculturally zoned lot, you have a lot more space to install a larger capacity of solar
right,
panels.
like
so,
Dr. Carroll.
Right. So what does that look like in comparison to a quarter-acre lot that wants the solar panels in their backyard or on the roof? So absolutely, if the commission would want us to pursue that and sort of look at different policies related to commercially zoned properties and residential zoned properties, then we'd be more than happy to look into that.
Yeah, I think it warrants looking into that because there's some clear differences there.
So now that Commissioner Meiske has kind of hit on this, question for staff.
Blame it on me.
I'm giving you the credit. On 1G, in commercially zoned districts only, pertinent components of wall or roof mounted must be located within an enclosed structure. Would Community Bank of Raymore not comply with 1G?
That was part of my grandfathering
Right.
question.
Well, and I guess my thought is taking it a step further. I would hope that they'd be grandfathered regardless, but I actually wouldn't have a problem with allowing that going forward.
Well, the note says these are clarifications of the requirements for new solar energies.
I know.
Right. So grandfathering is probably allowed.
Well, what I was not looking at grandfather. I was looking for I was looking for code to allow another business similar to Community Bank of Raymore to do roof-mounted exposed. Mm-hmm. That was kind of what my hope was. not really a sticking point, but, I mean, if I'm
Like the
happy,
city?
if I'm happy with it on
On the roof?
CBR, well, if I'm happy with it on CBR, why would I not want to allow it unrestricted on additional buildings, was my logic.
Yeah, I put a circle around that one, G also. I kind of put a little note by
Yeah.
that one as well. Kind of questioned that too, so.
And I suppose one of the issues I see in moving forward with that is you get, similar to CUNY Bank of Raymore, they've got a pitched roof or a hipped roof, if you will, whereas maybe another commercial business might have a flat roof where it's a lot easier to screen those panels.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense if you can, but.
Right,
But I'd hate to have to force them to apply for a variance.
right. And in that case, I mean, screening something on a hipped roof would obviously look perhaps a little more obnoxious than just having the solar panels on the roof
Well,
themselves.
and this is the future. I mean, it's gonna
Seems
get
to be.
cheaper and people are gonna do more of this.
Well,
So,
we'll just tap into the highways, which will be covered with solar panels.
yeah, okay.
I forget.
Yeah, so when you talk
that-
about enclosing,
not make
in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we kind of want to promote this to an extent. So when you're enclosing everything, you're kind of telling the world, don't look at this, don't look at this, but you really want people to look at it and see it.
Yeah, I think
So-
so too. Commissioner Sarsfield.
I don't know if I had if we grandfather other things in, which I'm not against grandfathering in, and I know we have a tendency to, because it is commercial property and they're bringing business and employment to our people, so forth, we seem to say, okay, you can do it like the bank on the corner did because your house isn't made the same way, or your business is almost like his, you can't put the solar panels where they should be, et cetera, and it's facing this or it's facing that. But Mrs. Jones has the same house as Mr. Smith, and he can't put the solar panels in according to the code, and they says, well, that house over there does, and it's not devaluating anybody's property, and it's been there for 10 years. I have the same type of house. I cannot put my solar panels into the way the code says it's to put them in. So now you are restricting my rights by saying me, and I can't save money now by doing solar panels because they don't face the right direction. So I think it's one of those things where we either, if you want solar panels, go do it. If it's on your roof, it can't be bigger than your roof, et cetera. If it's in the yard, you have to have so much space around it and keep it simple as possible. Because that can open up a lot of can of worms for down the road, saying, well, just because it was grandfathered in, no one was told he can't remove it, and this and that, and it can travel on and cost the city money going to court, and et cetera, et cetera.
So-
I agree. I think we got to be careful because this is behavior you want to encourage. And if you want to encourage it, we got to be careful with too many restrictions. Not to say you do want to have it here and you want to have some restrictions, but as he said, this is something we want to encourage, so we got to be careful about it because it would discourage you if it's too restrictive.
Right, so to pick up on your conversation and Commissioner Sarsfield, let me ask Commission a question. Again, I see a couple of different degrees. What I hear is that we don't want new code to be any more restrictive than current code. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there's not much current code, right?
Yeah, agreed, but
There is, this revision was just clarifying some and adding a couple additional
Right.
points to the existing code.
So what I was hearing, Commissioner Bowie and Commissioner Sarsfield in particular, what I was hearing was if it's okay on a structure now, why would it not be okay on a structure in the future? We're not trying to tighten the regulations on solar.
Right, if I could just clarify, the only change that's been made from the previous time that you all saw this was, I guess, a removal of a restriction from where it could be placed on the roof. We had originally suggested that it could only be placed on a rear or side-facing roof, but we've since removed that, and now it can be placed on the rear, side, or front-facing roof. As I said, depending on what the HOA would allow. That's really the only restriction that would be in place, is whether or not the HOA would allow that to be installed
Yeah.
there.
Right,
And-
but that puts us in the clear, though.
Right,
Right.
HOA
Yes,
is,
go put it up, and their homeowners association says, no, you can't.
Yeah.
The monkey's off our back. We
Then
give
it's
them
on the
permission.
HOA to
Right.
work that issue out somehow.
exactly.
We're allowing it, but the HOA might be a little more restrictive than the city.
Yeah. HOA is beyond our scope.
The issue that I would like to work through, I suppose, would be the screening requirement. I mean, should we remain restrictive and require commercially zoned properties to screen that? I mean, we require them to screen other utilities, such as air conditioners that might be on the roof, or other facilities that might be located on the roof or on the side of their property. But our solar panels are an exception to that rule. Or is that something we want to encourage to allow commercial retailers to embrace solar energy?
My opinion would be no, that we don't need to require commercial buildings to be screened, and that's kind of combination based on some experience outside of Raymore, but also CBR being the example. Let's answer that one little question. Commission, are you comfortable with not requiring solar installations on a roof of commercial to be screened?
Yeah, the way you asked.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
You're okay with it not being screened?
That was 7 hands, so yeah, we're comfortable. I think what we're telling you is we're comfortable with striking 1G. Pretty much. Anything else that might relate. So yeah, do we want to give staff guidance with having noted that change? Do we want to give staff guidance to proceed with a draft ordinance on incorporating the material this evening? Show of hands, yes. Okay. Hey, that's a lot easier than chickens. Maybe we should put chickens on the roof but screen them. No, sorry. Never mind.
Okay. That's interesting.
Or we're just getting tired, but no, screen, roof, commercial. Commissioner Armstrong?
I did have one question for
No,
staff.
don't apologize. That's why we're here.
On 2E, can you clarify the restrictions on less than 50% of the lot?
Absolutely. So that sort of relates to another requirement we have in the EDC that relates to accessory structures on a lot. There's currently accessory structures can't make up more than 8% of the coverage of your lot. So we were just looking at the potential for somebody that owns maybe a 3-acre lot, for say, since we were talking about that earlier. That sort of restricts them from turning that essentially into a solar farm if it's not zoned commercial or zoned for a commercial solar farm. And 50% was sort of ambiguous. That was just based on a little bit of research that was done through other regulations in DC and a couple from other cities. But like I said, that would just prevent somebody in a residentially zoned lot from turning that into essentially what might turn into a commercial operation of farming solar energy, if you will.
So would that not be covered in the verbiage that speaks about maximum allowable lot coverage for the underlying zoning district?
Where was that?
I guess my
that's-
thought is that if
Yeah,
it's...
that's 2E.
So you're thinking that might be covered elsewhere in the Unified Development Code of the coverage that might be allowed for solar
Right.
installations.
If the lot is allowed to be used for accessory dwellings or whatever for a certain percentage, then certainly your solar panel usage should fit with that. But to otherwise restrict it, I'm not sure I understand the logic behind that.
I think what we were getting at with that was differentiating between an accessory building and an accessory use of solar energy. Obviously, 50% of a lot with solar panels might not be as obtrusive as 50% of a lot with an accessory building. The size of those are a little bit different, in my opinion, if that makes sense.
So this is expanding the use
Yes.
of that lot?
Yes.
Okay.
You could cover
okay.
more of your lot with solar panels than you could with accessory buildings.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So if I have a 50-acre farm, I'm allowed to put 25 acres of solar panels on it, according to what you're saying.
So long as it complied with all the other provisions in this section, yes.
So that in a way, that would still look like a solar farm.
Essentially, yes, but you would have a larger property where you would typically expect that.
Well, that's what I'm trying, we can use that 50% number for nice a 1 acre lot, 2 acre lot, or backyard or something like that, but if someone wants to really do it, and here we have, and the guy next to him has 25 acres, and the one next to him is, hey, he's making a lot of money with these solar panels, I think I'll put another 5 acres of solar panels in, and so forth. And you already set a precedent, so now you have a whole area, because there's good money in solar panels. If you can afford the installment, you can get a good return on it.
So, Mr. Kapke, did you have a comment specifically on that?
No, I was just commenting that it's the 50% if it's across the board,
Right,
it's across the
right.
board.
The thought is it would be proportional with whatever size lot you have, it's still proportional to 50% of that lot. So 50% on a quarter-acre lot will still look a lot different than 50% on a 50-acre lot, if you will.
Right, but that's what I'm trying to explain. So you're doing it and you're making a good bit of money on your 25 acres of solar panel now, so I want to do it for at least my 12 acres of solar panel, and someone else is going to do it on his 30-acre solar panel, because, hey, it's a good investment. I don't have to mow the grass. I don't have to feed the animals. I don't have to herd them, and they just sit there and make it money for me.
So based on what I'm told by a friend who lives in Belton, and I've not checked this out personally, but I think if you wanted to tie into the grid to provide power on a shady day or whatever, I think the utility company is also going to have rules and regulations. And basically, whereas the utility, what I'm told is that the utility will allow you to tie into the grid and have solar panels providing your power on optimum days, but they don't really want you to compete against them. They really are not intending you to have a massive solar farm and be routinely pumping significantly more energy to the grid than you're consuming. I don't know that except from my friend in Belton and his experience.
Well,
I think there's more to it than city code.
Well, just for something I do know about, my brother got his solar panels in California, and the state of California was trying to restrict it because he's up in the wine growing thing near the redwood forest and blah, blah, blah. And the federal government came in and says if he wants to put a solar panel on his hard hat, he's allowed to do it, because the federal government was overriding it and is pushing it. So whether the local electric company says today, we don't like your idea, all you got to do is write a letter to one of the 500 energy groups that are out there, and you're going to have a lot of hassle on your part, and someone's going to give in, and it's probably not going to, and it's going to probably be the utility company. I'm just trying to say, if it's a 1 acre lot or below, 50% of your extra ground space. If it's 3 acre lot, 40%. If it's a 50 acre lot or whatever, or 100 acre, 20%. Divided in categories, so you won't have the solar farm, someone putting 50 acres of solar panels on his 100 acre property, and the neighbor doing the same thing, and the neighbor doing it again. I'm just saying, divide it up respectively. If you're doing it to offset your price of your house and your barn, or whatever it might be, or your business, and you have X number of kilowatts as your average monthly bill, that's how much solar panel you could put in, or 20% more of what it is. That way you stop the farm syndrome.
And that sounds like what I was told the utility company would agree to. And of course, their leverage is very simply, do you want to tie into the grid or not? If you wanted to be standalone, they wouldn't have any regulatory authority over them. But if you're tying into the grid and pumping electricity to the grid on a good day and drawing from it, then they've got some leverage. But that's not city code. That's something else entirely. I'm just thinking, if you had 100 acres, that could be agricultural. We would regulate use of that far less in many cases than we would a quarter-acre subdivision lot. And I think we've had good discussion this evening on expectations and why that does make sense from a zoning point of view. Okay, well, I think we actually gave you 7 hands to proceed with solar energy, so do we need a motion to actually send you forward on these, or is guidance sufficient? Mr. Kapke, do you have any thoughts?
I don't think they need a motion.
Okay, I didn't think we did, but
Direction they would need.
I didn't think we did, but I always defer to the legal advice. So I think that concludes our discussion on potential UDC amendments and would take us to City Council report. Mr. Kapke?
Yes, I'll make a brief report. The city council meeting on September 25th had a very extensive agenda. Of interest to this body is that there were 2 appointments. There was a reappointment of Commissioner Pfizer and the appointment of a new commissioner, Mario Urguia.
Yeah, Urquia. It's hard to pronounce.
It's hard to trill that L, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you will have new commissioners. The council approved the requirement of sidewalks and the development of sidewalks on the undeveloped lots that you had previously acted on. There were 4, Glen Eagle 4th, Lemoore Estates, Madison Valley, and 2 in Madison Valley, lots 53 and 49. And the council approved the replat of the Good Ranch replat that you approved. And those are the actions that they took that involve things that had been before you.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Mr. Kapke. And Mr. Catarat or Mr. Gress, would you like to give us the staff report?
Thank you, sir. And I do realize the report in your packet was for August. Of course, with the mailing of the packets a little ahead of the end of the month, we weren't able to give you the September report. That hasn't been completed yet. But I can indicate, as far as construction activity, had a very strong September. We issued 29 permits, so we're still ahead of where we were last year, so we're on a record pace again for this year. That remains very strong. Building activity remains very strong in our community. On the applications for the Planning Commission, it's very quiet. We had the site plan this evening, but we do not have any applications currently under review. We know there's a couple of phases of Creekmore that will be coming forward because they're out there working on the roadways as we speak. But they can do, when you have preliminary plat approval, you're allowed to move forward with road construction even before you submit a final plat in Raymore, and so that's currently where they're at. Shortly, we'll see the next phase of Edgewater and another phase of Westbrook, so they continue to build towards Madison Street. And of course, the Cunningham subdivision, they're starting on Madison Street, so eventually they will be meeting. I would say they're probably at 55% build out right now. Got about 650 homes in the subdivision, so it's pretty active up there. We're expecting Brookside subdivision to submit another final plat as they continue their movement towards Hebok Hill Road. So those are the applications that are out there, but not currently scheduled. So we do not have anything currently for your October 17th meeting. Probably look to cancel that meeting unless something comes up. I don't know, unless there's another topic that the commission would want to cover.
Does anyone on the commission have an objection to canceling October 17th? No. I think we can pass on that. If there's no work to be done, we will then meet first Tuesday in November.
Yes, sir. And so we'll keep that open at this time.
Sure. We'll plan on that.
Yes, plan on that.
Mr. Ketter, can I just jump in? Real quickly, I know you're going through this, and can you just give us 30 seconds on, and you kind of did it a little bit, but can you give us 30 seconds on permits, code enforcement activity, anything that's going on that we need to kind of be aware of or be looking at in terms of those charts that you always include? Is there anything, any trends that you see happening? If you got 30 seconds to just run through that real quick.
The trends that you'll see continue to be increased home construction, single-family development. At this point in time, at this time of the year, we're number 7 in the metro area. We have jumped ahead of Blue Springs in new home construction starts. We're ahead of Shawnee. These are very large communities that we are having more new single-family growth than they are. And so, the only communities, since we're number 7, you see the really big players. You got Kansas City, Missouri. You've got Wyandotte County, KCK. You've got Overland Park, Lenexa, Lee Summit. And then there's Raymore. So we're ahead of all those other communities. Very significant, I believe. The plus of that, why I like talking about that, is rooftops drive commercial, and rooftops drive the development of our commercial areas in our city. And as we continue to grow residentially, you'll see some of the commercial development happen. We are really hoping for movement on the south side of our community. We talked about Prairie View of the Good Ranch right off of Hubach Hill Road. I just mentioned Brookside off of Hubach Hill Road. To have new home activity down at the interchange is very, very important. So it would be the driver for commercial development to occur in that area. So, I really stress what we're doing residentially. Unfortunately, at this time, Belton is reaping the benefits of our home construction because their commercial land is a little bit more accessible, a little bit more visible, just better placed right now. Our interchange further south, you look around, you don't see a lot of rooftops unless you're looking up north towards Raymore. But you look to the west, you look to the south, there's not a home to be seen. And that's the problem with our interchange at this time. But we continue driving those numbers, and I think it's going to have positive effects on our commercial development in our community as we move forward.
So I'm not really being intentionally facetious, but it sounds like, from what you have not said, it sounds like Qdoba, Mod Pizza, Firehouse Subs is now old news. They're open, and they seem to have quite a few cars in the area most of the time.
They're doing well, yeah. And that was a significant development for Raymore. So they still have 2 more tenant spaces to fill. Yeah. But obviously very excited for that development. Yeah. But that happened on a corridor with a tremendous volume of traffic.
Sure.
Versus Hubach Hill Road, which just doesn't have the traffic.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Good. Okay.
Sir, that really does conclude staff report at this time. Nothing else to really cover.
Just to note again, we're planning on canceling the October 17th meeting, and as of now, we'll plan on meeting the first Tuesday in November.
Yes, sir.
Good. Okay. Public comment. I don't see a lot of public, so we shall move on to commission member comment.
Could I go first this evening?
Oh, you may.
Sure.
Mayor Turnbow.
I really don't have a report. I wanted to publicly thank Mr. Sarsfield for his service on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Given the fact we won't have a meeting in 2 weeks, this will be his last meeting with us.
Yeah.
So thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure working with you.
And I won't be able to keep you on your toes anymore, Joe. But you might find me in the audience.
You can probably still do that.
I'll do that, yeah.
You know the phone number.
Yes.
So I'll move on. Thank you, Mayor Turnbow. Commissioner Sarsfield.
Thank you for, and I'll say it nicely, putting up with me. I come from a different area. I think different ways. I try to put things in the perspective of someone didn't think of it, someone else might, and to save hassle for the city later on and so forth. And sometimes things are better left alone. I mean, they need tweaking once in a while to keep up with the times, but sometimes it's like, 60 years, we haven't had one lawsuit, we haven't done this, we haven't done that. It looks like it's running nice, you know what I mean? Leave well enough alone. So, thank you for a great learning experience, and I may be out of sight, but I'm not going away.
That's good. Vice Chair Fizer.
Well, I always like to plug events in town when
Oh,
I
yeah.
get this chance. So last Thursday, the Arts Commission had a paint and sip party at the new Centerview, and there were probably 30 to 40 people there and a waiting list of just as long. So it was pretty successful, and it was a lot of fun, and people did sip a lot and get pretty funny. But there are pictures of it on their Arts Commission Facebook page. You will see me. I'm just known as Wife Kelly, which I do have a last name, but that's neither here nor there. And also, coming up soon will be the new sculpture at the corner of the Cadence property. The sort of Welcome to Raymore is going to be getting here, I want to say this month, but it might be next month. I'm not sure, but it'll be something to see, so I think that's something we should all look forward to. And I will miss your clever saying. Sometimes I never know what you're about to say, and it's always entertaining, and it's been fun having you here.
Yep, thank you. Commissioner Armstrong.
Oh, I just wanted to thank staff for all their efforts. I think I was one of the major pot stirrers, and I appreciate all your time and efforts, and I'm sorry to see you going, Commissioner Scarsdale. I and the chickens will miss you.
Well said. Commissioner Meiske.
I just want to state for the record that I do like the logo, the new logo. That I'm not sure how long that's been here, but
Not long.
oh,
pretty
okay.
new.
Well, good. Then I'm not that far behind.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Bowie.
No comment. Pleasure working alongside of you, Commissioner Sarsfield. Will definitely be missed. Appreciate all your hard work.
Yeah. As do I, and I'll try to keep this brief, but my appreciation to staff. Mr. Kapke, it's good to see you again. Thank you for coming and trying to keep us honest. And Mr. Carteret, Mr. Grass, thank you for your patience and hard work. And of course, as you realized already, it's just beginning. We hope we've given you some useful guidance this evening, but there's obviously a lot of work left. Notwithstanding, we're going to take October 17th off, but I know you'll be working hard in our absence. So unless there's anything else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
Second.
Yeah, I think I heard a moved by Mayor Turnbow, second by Commissioner Meiske. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. And I hope I count 7. I did. Thank you. We are adjourned.